Good morning. Today is the 18th of November and it's 9 o'clock and this is the Ordinary Council meeting here at 1 Nicholas Street. To mark attendance, I see everyone's in attendance and good morning to you all. And we'll start off with the acknowledgement of country. Councillor Kunzelman.
Thank you, Mayor. Ipswich City Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, acknowledging our gratitude that we share this land today, but also acknowledging the cost of that sharing, and our hope that we can move to a place of justice and partnership together, and that we will welcome the continuing opportunities for further engagement.
Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. We'll move on to the opening prayer, and Deputy Mayor, would you like to lead us into prayer?
Heavenly Father, we seek you to be with us in this meeting today. Assist us to be an example to others, bringing strength and encouragement in whatever we do, and equip us for the ongoing challenges as they arise. Give the guidance to continue to make wise decisions for both the short and long-term benefit of our city and our community, regardless of however difficult or unpopular some will be. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We move on to apologies and leaves of absence. I have none. Are there any from the floor? No. We'll move on to condolences, and I don't have any. Tributes, there are none. Presentation of petitions, there are none. I'll move on to item 8, which is the presentations and deputations. And I'd like to present the South East Queensland Local Government Mutual Services Risk Excellence Award for 2020-2021 to Council, which is this beautiful award here that was presented to our Council just recently. I was honoured to accept this award on behalf of Ipswich City Council, which recognises Council's well-planned and executed road to risk management maturity across the organisation. Considerable work has gone into this space at Council, specifically since the return to elected representation in March last year. Council recognises that risk management is an integral part of good management practice and fully supports risk management as part of its corporate governance processes. Council is committed to managing identified risks that can impact positively or negatively on Council's ability to achieve the strategic objectives identified in iFuture, our Council's new corporate plan and community vision. Enterprise risk management is a key part of Council's core business, adopted by management and staff as an integral part of organisational culture. To manage risk, Council has adopted an enterprise risk management framework that promotes a standard and systemic approach to risk management throughout Council. It truly is fantastic to see this strategic approach reaping rewards for the new Ipswich City Council. I'm proud of the fact that the LGMS has recognised the incredible work that the Ipswich City Council team has undertaken over the past few years within the enterprise risk management space. Council will continue to invest in improving risk, its management systems and practices, and providing ongoing support and commitment to the LGMS. The award is outstanding news for our passionate and highly capable team. And if I'm not embarrassing anyone, I'd like to mention a few names, if I may. So I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Graham McGinniskin in his work, Kathy pardon my pronunciations, Kathy Jackmowitz, Elizabeth Blake, Elise Gould, and Jennifer Bunton. Thank you so much to the team for your incredible work. You've been on a journey together to restore public faith and confidence in Ipswich City Council, and I firmly believe everything begins from within, but we've only just begun. I'm very pleased that we're able to share this expertise and resources not only within our council, but also with our colleagues across other councils. It's great to see Ipswich being a leading light. Thank you very much. That's it. And with that, Sarah, I present it to council.
Oh, thank you. Well done, team. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. We now go on to item 9, which is public participation, and there is none. I now move on to declarations of interest on the matters on the agenda and open the floor to any declarations. Councillor Madsen.
Thank you, Mayor. In accordance with Section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act 2009, I, Councillor Jacob Madsen, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 14.6, Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee report. The nature of the declarable conflict of interest is I'm a member of the Ipswich Trades Hall and Labor Day Committee Executive, and our building, the Ipswich Trades Hall, is adjacent to that redevelopment. As a result of my conflict of interest, I'll leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madsen. Are there any others? Councillor Fichtner?
Thanks, Mayor. In accordance with 150 EQ of the Local Government Act of 2009, I, Councillor Andrew Fichtner, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item number 14.6, entitled Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee's Report. The nature of my declarable conflict of interest are my business interests in Bar Heisenberg Proprietary Limited and A1A Events Proprietary Limited, both located in the top of town at Ipswich. As a result of my conflict, I will leave the room while the matter is considered and voted on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fichtner. Are there any other Deputy Mayor?
So in accordance with section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act, in accordance with section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act 2009, I inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in items 15.6 and 15.7, titled Variations of Waste Transport Services Contract 16251, to include additional services for the consolidation and transport of curbside recycling content, and procurement preferred supply arrangement 17209, provision of resource recovery and disposal of non-compostable waste. The name of the related party is Remondis. The nature of the relationship or the related party to myself is that two of my brothers are employees of the related party. And the nature of the related party interest in the matter is recommended that council enter into a deed of variation with the supplier, and that council enter into a preferred supply arrangement for the 5 suppliers, one of which is the related party. And I invite councillors to determine if I can continue to participate in the decision process. And I also have another one. In accordance with section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act 2009, I, Councillor Nicole John, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 14.2.4, titled of the Governance and Transparency Committee, Procurement TCP 10590, supply and delivery of light vehicles. The nature of the declarable conflict of interest is I am an employee of the 949, and the one of the suppliers, Llewellyn's, is a customer of that company. I would invite the other councillors to determine if I can continue to participate in the decision process.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate there's nothing wrong with having conflict of interest as long as they're declared and they're managed well. So thank you very much to all 3 councils for those declarations. We now need to look at those two votes for the councils to look at. I'll look at item 15.6 and 15.7, where I understand, Deputy Mayor, 2 of your brothers work for Remondis who are on this panel. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. I guess I'll open up to the fact that I think that there would be even though you've not been part of that decision, I personally think it would be best for you probably to leave that room when the vote is happening, just to make sure there's not a perception of a conflict. But I guess I'm open up for the discussion with the floor on what your views are.
Can I just clarify that this one we're voting on the first declaration?
Yes, so the 15.6 and 15.7.
And do I recall correctly that this first declaration, a similar declaration, has been made previously? Yeah. Okay. And what was the?
I don't recall what the outcome was of that.
Could I ask Councillor Jonik her recollection? My recollection is that you may have left the meeting, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree.
Okay.
Similar approach this meeting.
Any other discussion? In that case, I'm sorry, pardon me, I'm just looking at here. I move that Councillor Jonik must leave the meeting in relation to item 15.6 and 15.7, titled, my apologies, I'll just go to the titled Variation to Waste Transport Services Contract number 16251 to include additional services for the consolidation and transport of curbside recycling content. And item 15.7, which is Procurement Preferred Supply Arrangement 17209, provision of resource recovery and disposal of non-putrescible waste. because there may be a reasonable person may believe that there's a conflict of interest there. I move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? I'll look around the room. It's everyone except obviously yourself, Councillor Jonick. Thank you very much. So we'll, when we come to that matter, you'll leave. The next item, which is 14.2.4. Now, that was something that was at the Governance and Transparency Committee, I understand. So thank you very much for declaring that conflict of interest. So it's about the fact that Llewellyn Motors are one of those people. Now, you weren't part of the procurement of that?
Yes.
Yep.
So they were listed as part of the tender consideration
Yep.
plan.
So you are you're employed by River 949, is that correct? Or you yep. And they do advertising for them, or you do advertising for Llewellyn, or what's the?
Yes, they're one of the advertisers through the 949.
Yes. Okay.
Mayor, if I could move a
Yeah,
motion? Yeah, I'll move that Councillor Jonick participates and votes on that item because there is no direct personal or financial benefit for her and the connection is so remote and therefore a reasonable person would trust that the final decision is made in the public interest.
May I just, I hate to be the fly in the ointment, but I think when I go through my Facebook feed, Councillor Jonick, there's, you are doing advertising for Llewellyn Motors on behalf of River, would that be correct?
I'm advertising through River,
Yeah.
and Llewellyn is the client of River. So
Yeah.
yes, so not directly, but through River 949.
I guess I'm just asking, when I see the ads, it's you in the Llewellyn showroom with the Llewellyn Motors cars.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there would be a public perception there.
Definitely
anyway.
perception. That's why I'm raising the conflict.
Appreciate
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. But I do note that you've put something forward, Councillor Tully. I guess I was going to put forward that I suggest that the Deputy Mayor leave the room just to from a probity perspective. But
I've moved that and then
You're
I'll
moved?
explain briefly if there is a second.
do you mind moving that again? Sorry, just so I could
Yeah,
send it again.
I'll move that Councillor Jonick participate and vote on that item because there is no direct personal or financial benefit to her and the connection is too remote and therefore a reasonable person would trust that the final decision is made in the public interest.
Right, I guess I'd question the financial benefit, considering that she's doing advertising
perhaps,
for them.
Mayor, I think the appropriate thing under standing orders for you to ask if there's a seconder.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Ryland. Yeah, I'll put the matter to the...
Well,
So it's just, my apologies.
Yeah,
I'll open it up for discussion. My apologies.
I'll just briefly say that the connection has been declared. It's a very remote connection between a contractor with this council and Councillor Jonick's position as a councillor and a part-time employee. And I think any reasonable person would think that the link is so tenuous that provided it's declared, the electors who are in our division shouldn't be disenfranchised over the matter. Otherwise, a vote is lost and members of the public should be entitled to have full representation at all times unless a potential conflict is so huge that they are excluded by law from considering the matter in a council meeting.
Thank you. I guess I'll put the view forward that that there are ads showing the councillor advertising the cars and then potentially getting a contract for cars. And I acknowledge the fact that the Deputy Mayor had nothing to do with that decision, and today we're ratifying because of the amount of money in that particular contract. Are there any other views or discussion points?
May
Yes,
just,
Councillor.
as we're discussing it, in the last 16 years I've bought all of my cars from down there, so I don't know if I have a conflict of interest either.
No, because you're not getting paid to.
But I've
To
always
advertise
bought my
one.
cars there.
Yeah.
So.
Any other discussion? I'll put Councillor Tully's motion to the vote. Those in favour for the Deputy Mayor to remain, may you please raise your hand. So I can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So Councillor Ireland, Councillor Tully, Councillor Fechner, and was that Councillor Milligan? So just to stay. Those against, please raise your hands. Myself, Councillor Madsen, Councillor Doyle and Councillor Kunzelmann. Since it's split and I have decided the vote is that the Deputy Mayor will leave the room for that particular item. Thank you.
Could I just clarify a matter of procedure? That motion's defeated, but there's no substantive motion about how the matter should be dealt with.
Okay, thank you. So I move that Councillor Johnnick must leave the meeting in relation to item, let me just look it up, item 14.2 and item 4. Which is the Procurement TCP 10590, supply and delivery of light vehicles. Because a reasonable person may believe that the final decision may be influenced and may not be in the public interest. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Open up for discussion. Thank you, Councillor Madsen.
For me, this is not a straightforward matter because we've discussed the concept of perception. Well, perception isn't a conflict of not. That's a underlying misunderstanding that sometimes the public has. I just wanted to state that I'm more than confident that when Councillor Johnnick comes into this chamber, she's acting in the public interest. I wouldn't say that it influences me, but the scrutiny on local government that occurs in Queensland at this point in time makes me err to the side of perception, even though I've just said that it's a really misunderstood concept. But I would just like to restate that I have full confidence in Councillor Johnnick and her decision making in this chamber, and may that be heard clear today.
Thank you very much. And I agree that perception is subjective. It is subjective. Thank you. Any other discussion? I'll put that matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Myself, Councillor Madsen, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Kunzelmann. Those against, Councillor Ireland, Councillor Tully, Councillor Fechner, Councillor Milligan. Therefore, I have the deciding vote, so I vote that Councillor Johnnick will leave the room for that particular item. Thank you. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for being so proactive. It does feel a bit awkward sometimes, but thank you so much. And it goes to your integrity that you've been so open. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll now move on to item 11. Oh, sorry.
I have a declaration to make.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Apologies for that, Councillor Tom.
Yeah, you moved on too quickly for me.
Sorry.
It's in relation to the agenda item 14.2, Governance and Transparency Committee, items 3 and 3.1 in respect of Australian crawl. And I'll declare that I may have a declarable interest in the matter, that a member of my family received a free admission pass some 10 to 12 years ago from the company. There has not been a current pass for a decade or so, and my view is that I'd invite the council to make a decision, but I believe that even though I've got to declare that, or probably have to declare that there is no current connection. It hasn't been for some considerable time.
So it's just for item 3 of the GTC?
Yeah, 3 and 3.1.
3 and 3.
I've put in 3.1 because that's related to the same organisation.
So Australian crawl?
Yes.
Crawl.
Yeah.
Okay. May I just seek advice from the acting CEO if it doesn't seem to be prescribed to be just a declarable? Yep. Yep. And what are you proposing, Councillor Tully?
You know, in my view, it's a matter over 10 years ago and no longer current for a similar period of time. And you know, I with the agreement of the meeting, intend to stay and vote on the matter in the public interest.
Lost my piece of paper. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry.
Councillor Tully participates and votes on
Agree.
item 14.3, and he made specific mentions to 3.1 there as well, because there is no personal or financial benefit to Councillor Tully, and therefore the reasonable person would trust that the final decision is made in the public interest.
Thank you, Councillor Fickner. And Councillor Cosworth seconded. Open up for any discussion. I'll be supporting that. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous, knowing that Councillor Tully didn't vote on that. Thank you very much, Councillor Tully. Any other declarations of interest? No? Thank you very much. I really appreciate the forthright nature of that. Thank you. Move on to 11.1, which is confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting. I move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 21st of October 2021 be confirmed. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Any discussion on those minutes? There being no discussion, I'll put that motion to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We move on to item 11.2, which is the minutes of the special meeting. I move that the minutes of the special meeting held on the 2nd of November be confirmed. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelmann. Any discussion, debate? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's carried and unanimous. There is no mayoral minute. Pardon me for a moment. My apologies, I had a page missing. Item 13, which is business outstanding, including conduct matters and matters lying on the table to be dealt with. There are none. If I may, before we go on to reception and consideration of committee reports, I'd like to bring forth item 15.12. At the moment, which is the late report that came through yesterday. So I vote that move a motion that we suspend standing order so we may deal with the CEO contract of employment. I move that. I move a procedural motion. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. So we move on to item 15.12, which is the CEO contract of employment. And the recommendations are that Council approve the contract of employment, which is confidential attachment 1, for candidate A in the position of Chief Executive Officer, and B, the Council authorise myself to execute on behalf of the Council the contract of employment. I move those two recommendations together. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelmann. I open it up for discussion. Yes, Councillor Tully?
Can I just clarify, the email that I received yesterday said there would be a matter circulated today, some details of the contract?
I sent the contract details to you a few days ago and the performance agreement yesterday.
As I understand it, there was an email late yesterday saying that the details would be submitted this morning or circulated this morning.
I provided that, I emailed that to you yesterday.
Yeah.
So I provided the contract to you a couple of days ago.
Well, I do have some questions to ask then in relation to the matter, and it might be best if we go into a closed session.
I agree,
Okay. In that case, I move that we move into closed session to discuss this. May I have a seconder, Councillor Tully? Yep. Thank you. So I move that we move back into open session. May I have a second for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you for that. I'm going to slightly change recommendation A, Vicky, so that council approve the contract of employment, remove what's in the brackets for candidate A, and then insert as previously identified at the special meeting on the 2nd of November in the position of Chief Executive Officer. May I just check if the seconder, Councillor Kunzelman, is okay with that? Is that a nod, Councillor Kunzelman? Thank you. So those two recommendations are there.
Thank you.
No, remove the brackets, please. I think. I think yeah. Agreed. Thank you. I'll open the matter up for any discussion, debate. No, I'll move those two recommendations together. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. I will now sign on behalf of council. If I can ask you to witness me, Vicky. Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to announce Sonia Cooper as Ipswich City Council's new Chief Executive Officer. Sonia first came to council as the General Manager of Corporate Services in February last year. Sonia brought a wealth of government experience to council, having previously been the Deputy Commissioner with the Public Service Commission, a position she held since April 2013. Despite doing an excellent job as acting CEO since April this year, council knew it needed to undertake a thorough and far-reaching search for its next CEO to ensure we secured the right candidate for this role. 84 candidates put their hand up for the position, with applications coming from across Queensland and Australia. Through the formal application process, interviews, psychometric testing and very, very extensive background checks, Sonia has emerged as the standout candidate. Sonia, we thank you for your service as acting CEO and your patience over the past months as we did our due diligence. On behalf of the council here today and our entire organisation, congratulations on your well-deserved appointment to the role of CEO. Thank you. And with that, I move for an adjournment, seconded by, I think, Councillor Doyle. All those in favour? Adjournment for how much time would you like, Councillor Madsen? 15 minutes. Adjourn for 20 minutes. Councillor Doyle, you're okay with the 15-minute? Yes. See you then. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back. It's 10:26 and we've come back from an adjournment. Now we're back from the adjournment. I'd like to move a procedural motion to resume the meeting procedures that we did suspend. I move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I move that motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We're up to item 14, which is reception and consideration of committee reports. And the first one, 14.1, is the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee. That committee has full delegation, so I just move that the minutes of the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee report 2021-10 of the 4th of November 2012 be noted. Do I have a seconder? I'm looking to the deputy. Oh, no, Deputy Mayor, thank you. Any discussion on the GIW papers? No, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 14.2, which is the Governance and Transparency Committee. I'll move over to the Chair if you'd like to move something there.
Councillor Johnnick, just a moment. I would propose today that we accept items, we split it up into three. So we've got balance of the decisions made last week. And then I would split off item 4 so that Councillor Johnnick can exclude herself. And then I'd like to also split off item 7 because Councillor Tully has some concerns and discussion that he wishes to raise. I think if we split it up like that, that allows Councillor Johnnick to take part in discussion on the other matters.
Okay, so that way you're moving 1, 2, 3, 5, 6?
That's correct.
And then later on you'll move on the others?
Item 4 and 7 on their own.
Okay. Okay, so you're moving the items 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Do you wish to, would anyone like to second that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Would you like to speak to those items?
Yeah, I referred all the reports. They were quite straightforward matters. I would just raise that there was the matter on notice, the operating hours of the Georgie Conway Leichhardt Swim Centre. A response was meant to be given to us prior to today. That hasn't occurred, so if we could just chase that up.
I'll put you to CEO.
Thank you. Councillor, yeah, a response has been prepared, however, obviously hasn't made its way to you, so I'll chase that up.
Thank you.
All right, I'm okay with that, provided everyone else is. So yeah, I'm just happy to move those items together this morning.
Any discussion on items 1, 2, 3, 5 and 6? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Just so we follow the numerics, will we go to item 4 of the GTC, Councillor Matson?
Yep, I'll just let Councillor Johnnick.
Thank you. Item 4 is in the GTC was the procurement, TCP 10590, supply and delivery of light vehicles. I move for recommendation A through to D on that. Do I have a seconder for that?
Councillor Ireland.
Councillor Ireland? So I thought as Chair you might like to. Thank you. Any discussion on that recommendation? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous knowing that the Deputy Mayor is not in the room. May we ask for her to come back in? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We'll move on to item 7 of the Governance and Transparency Committee, and that is the Drug and Alcohol Counsellors Policy. So we can get a discussion underway. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I now open it up for discussion, or if you'd like to speak to council officers. I understand, Councillor Tully, you'd like to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Madsen used the word concerns about that. I don't have any specific concerns, but I do want to make some comments, and I do have an amendment to, or an addition to move at the end. Can I just say at the outset, this has been a long haul. The original proposal, of course, was for a random drug and alcohol testing, which I still do support. This goes some way to introducing a policy to ensure that councillors, and it applies only to councillors, are not under the influence of drugs or other alcohol or alcohol during when they're undertaking official duties. Can I say that the advice that we sought from the LGAQ makes it clear that Council does have the power within the legislative provisions of the state to take action along these lines with an appropriate policy, including random drug and alcohol testing. This doesn't go as far as that, but I think it's a reasonable start. Can I say that policy number 9.2, or point number 9.2, is very well intentioned, that where a matter is legitimately raised, it says it should be privately raised by the CEO or delegate directly with the councillor. And I think that's quite appropriate, because sometimes it's not possible to tell what a person's state is just beyond the obvious observations. And in that regard, Annexure 1 to the report, I think, is relevant. It's very wide-ranging what observations which are authorised to be made by the CEO or a departmental head. And this is in relation to councillors only. And on the adoption of this, it's a check boxes that if councillors were drowsy, agitated, anxious, restless, these are all separate ones, hostile, flu-like, suspicious, paranoid, hyperactive, fidgety, withdrawn, flushed complexion, sweating, unfocused or having a blank stare, exaggerated enunciation. I'll just finish it off in a moment, but I think we could all relate to some of these. I think every politician in Australia would probably succumb to one of these descriptions by about 10 o'clock each morning. Loud or boisterous, rapid, pressured, excessively talkative, nonsensical, silly, cursing, inappropriate speech, unkempt grooming or wearing inappropriate clothing. I'm not sure that would achieve what is intended, but I think we all know that generally not all of those would be indicative of any wrongdoing by a councillor. And in fact, none of those might be indicative of wrongdoing or contravention of the policy by the councillor, but they are a lot of things which I think if we, even I'd have to say maybe at times I've been paranoid, hyperactive, hostile, excessively talkative and so on. I'm just saying that in that context it's pretty wide-ranging. Because of that, and I think there's every reason to support this, because I still think there's a future for mandatory and random drug and alcohol testing. But I do think this is a moving feast in terms of councils that do already have this in Queensland. I believe Brisbane and Rockhampton are two examples. Could I propose an additional wording amendment to add the words, this policy is to be reviewed within 12 months? So I'll formally move that. If there's a seconder, I'll explain briefly why I've included that.
So I think I see Councillor Tully on page 228, which is attachment 1. There is a date of review.
Yeah.
So are you proposing a date in there, or do you just wish to add it in the recommendation?
What page is that? 221.
228.
Oh, 22. Just sorry, I've printed it, but.
I'm just asking, do you want a date of review written in the policy, or do you want it as part of the recommendation?
Well, 228, yeah.
Which is attachment 1.
I think
Sorry,
either would be
I've got 228.
appropriate.
I just can't see that date, man.
Either would be appropriate in my view.
Yeah.
So what's the date mentioned? I can't see it written on.
No, there is none in there.
Oh, okay.
At the moment, in that draft Drug and Alcohol Council's policy, date of review is blank.
Okay.
So I'm asking you, are you
No.
asking for Are you proposing that we amend the recommendation to include a date, or or should we just add that there in the policy, date of review?
No, I think it should be in the motion of adoption, so it clearly,
So recommendation A and a recommendation B is that this policy be reviewed
within 12
months?
Yeah.
That this policy?
Yes. Is to be reviewed within 12 months.
12 months.
If there's a seconder, there is.
So I was the mover. I'm happy with that. I'll check with the seconder, Councillor Doyle.
Yeah.
You're happy?
Okay, thank you. And if I just add, the reason for that is that this is a bit of a moving feast. There's some uncertainty about the legislative powers of councils under the Local Government Act and the Human Rights Act, but we do have councils in Queensland who have gone down this path. Also, I think it's appropriate for us to look at this again in 12 months to see how it's being administered. Is it appropriate, and can we move forward with any additional amendments during that period of time? Thank you.
May I speak to the relevant council officer on this? I think Mr Dunleavy.
Perhaps, Mayor, if I may, Chair, perhaps could you start the questions with me? And
Okay, sure.
If I can't answer, we can call on the relevant expert.
Obviously, we've had 2 workshops, and I guess I'll ask Councillor Tully for what would be helpful. What's the intent of the notice, of the original notice of motion? Certainly, from my perspective, I was wanting to ensure that there was mandatory random drug and alcohol testing. I think Councillor Tully was of a similar mind. We're both in lockstep with that. But this subsequent legal advice that we were getting was that we couldn't do random testing mandatory. So I'm guessing I'd like to speak to someone in council to explain that.
How about I'll provide a response, and if it's satisfactory or not, then we can call on Mr Dunleavy. So my understanding, and as I hoped we'd set out in the briefing note that we'd provided to councillors, the advice that was received from our internal perspective and on the interpretation of the letter that came from the LGAQ was not that we couldn't introduce a policy with either a 0% blood alcohol or drug concentration level, and once again, not that we couldn't introduce a policy for councillors with random testing. It is an option, and accordingly was an option that was included in the advice of officers to councillors. So it was one of the options that was considered and discussed at the workshop that was held with councillors. So that would be my position.
My understanding at council workshop, when we were discussing having mandatory random drug and alcohol testing, that the legal advice was that we couldn't do that because of the Human Rights Act. I'm happy to stand corrected.
Once again, I'm happy to bring up the lawyers, but it's not that it couldn't. It carried a level of risk, and there was a whole range of implications of doing that. So it was one of weighing up the provisions of the Human Rights Act, of the legislation and code of conduct that applies to councillors in Queensland and the provisions that exist there. So it is an option that's available. However, there is a level of risk given the nature of the role of councillors, and that's what was, I guess, set out in the advice and discussed by the councillors present at the workshop. But if I try and make eye contact with the experts in the room, is there anything that you would want to clarify or add?
I guess I'll ask Councillor Tully, was there any questions that you'd like to ask?
No, I just think you've confirmed in that advice, and I think it bears reading. It says, this is from the LGAQ, from their lawyers, to the extent that a councillor considers that a council policy about drug and alcohol testing of councillors infringes their human rights, we have difficulty in identifying which of the 23 human rights listed in the HR Act is in fact infringed. In any event, the effect of Section 58 of the Act is that Council can adopt such a policy so long as it has considered the protected rights under the Act and balanced those rights against the rights of others and public policy issues of significance. We're not sort of proceeding down that track today, but I think the advice is pretty clear that we do have the power to do that. I think that we should do that, and as part of that review of this policy, if it's adopted today, that review within 12 months should again look at the manner of going forward and what other councils may have moved forward in that regard during that 12-month period.
And I note that regardless of this policy or not, the code of conduct for councils across Queensland is the same, that we are not to be inebriated or under the influence. What's the exact word? Under the influence in conducting our business. So that's already in the code of conduct for all of councillors.
Mayor, through you as the chair, may I offer one consideration in relation to the additional recommendation that Councillor Tully has proposed and that you've seconded, that this policy is to be reviewed within 12 months. I'm just thinking of what would be an appropriate amount of time for this policy to actually have application and for us to then be able to meaningfully review it and provide advice, noting the point that, yes, other policies may well be introduced and the landscape will change, but if we were to have to review it within 12 months, that eats into that time, I guess. So practically it may only be 7 or 8 months before we're beginning the review process. And just noting all of the priorities of the officers, I wonder if we could ask you to consider a longer period of time that would allow more time for this policy to operate and for the landscape to change before such a review is to be commenced.
I'll hand over to the person that recommended that.
Yeah, the reason I suggested that was that, as I said before, this is a moving feast with other councils, and it could be that a review, about an operational review, and I might have run through that list of indicia of people under the influence, but there could be a whole variety of circumstances that arise during the next 12 months. That wording that I suggested enabled it to be reviewed earlier, if necessary, but not beyond 12 months. And all that means is that the policy is put back to us within that 12-month period by November 2022, which I think is not too long and not too short, but it doesn't prevent a review if necessary within that time period. Otherwise, if you say November 2022, well, there won't be any review until that date, and I don't think we should cut that option off. So my strong view is that that's deliberately intended to create the flexibility that we need.
Thank you, Councillor Tully, and thank you, CEO. Is there any more discussion on this particular matter? No, I'll put recommendation A and B together to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 14.3, the Community Culture, Arts and Sports Committee. I'll hand over to the chair of that committee to see how they'd like to move their report.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to propose the recommendation that Council adopt the recommendations of the committee. We had one substantive matter that we discussed, which is the creation of the Arts Advisory Panel, which is a wonderful initiative that comes from Creators of Ipswich Summit as a key outcome. So it's good to be moving things forward in this space, and I look forward to seeing what that group can dream up in terms of the future of the arts in our city.
Thank you. May I have a seconder to that? Councillor Kunzelman. Thank you. Any discussion on those reports? I just concur with you, Councillor Fechner. Very excited to see the Ipswich Arts Advisory Group progress. All those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you very much. Item 14.
Thank you, Mayor. I just move that the council move the recommendations of the committee.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Appreciate that. Any discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Item 14.5 is the Environment and Sustainability Committee. I'll hand over to the chair to make a move there.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the recommendation, the Council adopt the recommendations of the Environment and Sustainability Committee meeting be accepted.
Thank
There
you.
was, in doing so, there was one agenda item, that being the acknowledgement of the Enviro Plan 25 years campaign highlights. During the meeting, there was also a procedural motion with regard to just an administrative matter to correct a report on from previous meeting on the 2nd of September.
Thank you, Councillor Milligan. We seconded by Councillor Fechner. Thank you. Any discussion on that committee report? Thank you, Councillor Tully.
Thanks, Mayor. It's just in relation to item 2, that Enviro Plan highlights and the early history of that, and that was and I'd like to recognise today former Councillor Gerard Pender, who pushed for the adoption of the Enviro Plan and the Enviro Levy. And that's something that has enabled this council to acquire large tracts of land across the city. Can I say, as any novel rate or levy by the council can always attract some opposition, this was one that Councillor Pender pushed for a considerable period of time, and I think it's been widely accepted by the community, which is pretty rare in terms of rates and charges by councils or taxes by state or federal government. So I'd just like to place on the record his initiative in bringing that forward to fruition during his period as a councillor. He saw the value of that over a long period of time. It was in for the long haul, the adoption of that policy, and I think the results of that have paid off for our community.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tully. Any other discussion? No, I think we discussed that quite a bit at the committee meeting, so I'll put that matter to the item 14.5 to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 14.6, which is the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee. Thank you. I'll hand over to the chair of that committee for them to move.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that Council adopt the recommendations of the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee, number 10 of 2021, all 4 items in batch.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Thank you. Any discussion?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to take the opportunity to highlight one matter from committee, and that relates to the Ipswich Central revitalisation, the positioning framework and place plans that I'm delighted have now been finalised, and they'll be made available to the public so they can see the work that's being done behind the scenes by council officers in working towards revitalising our CBD. But not only has work been undertaken by council officers, we've worked in conjunction with a group that are known as the Ipswich Central Partnership Group, and they consist of residents, very passionate residents, hardworking, that want to help revitalise our CBD. So, and one of the most notable achievements that they've put into action is the Bell Street clean-up, which is coming up on the 28th of November. So I invite everyone to come along and pitch in as we try and certainly improve what is the gateway to our city as commuters get off the train there at Ipswich train station.
Thank you, Councillor. It's great to see community-led initiatives like this. And I note that you and Councillor Fechner are both involved in that clean-up on the 28th.
Yeah, absolutely. But community advocacy, is so important, and seeing this alive and well is fantastic.
Any other discussion? Put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. We'll just wait for Councillor Fechner and Madsen to come back. Thank you. On to now item 15.1, which is the CEO Organisational Performance Report for October 2021. Would anyone like to ask the relevant council officer any questions on this matter? No, I'll move this report then. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Fechner. I guess open up for discussions.
Yeah, just a brief comment. Thanks, CEO, for taking on the feedback in terms of the outstanding actions report that's provided to us. I note that there's a lot of TBAs in that column that I'm hoping will be squared away in due course. And just to maintain the efficient order of business in council ordinary meetings. I'm aware that we were meant to have a matter bill that was laying on the table and to be addressed today with regards to the traditional owners reference group. There's a couple of outstanding matters, including the Leichhardt Pool, Mr Alderton, who presented to us the first public participation that we had from a resident, which was have meant to have come to full council this month as well, and that one's slipped away. So I just want to note that you know, we can be flexible on those things, but when it's a matter for council ordinary, I think that we need to prepare ourselves more diligently and ensure that we meet those timelines. Just a little bit of feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Fechner. Any other discussion? No? Put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I think it's unanimous and carried. Thank you. 15.2, which is the Q1 of the operational plan for 2021. And the recommendation is that this report be received and noted. I do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to move and ask for a seconder because it may lead to a discussion as opposed to just a question. So I'll move that particular report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Doyle. Thank you. CEO, just going through it's great to see the very first report from there. And noting the traffic lights on there to see what parts are, how things are tracking in particular. Can I just see there's a number of items that we've got there that the budget status is no budget allocated, we're asking for work, and may I ask what's being done by the organisation to address that in particular?
Certainly, Mayor. So I'm just looking for the first of those so I can give some context around it.
I guess theme 2, there's the Ipswich Arts and Cultural Strategy.
Yep.
And there's no budget against that. And there's a number of programs there.
Yep. So rather than speaking to the specifics to your question, Mayor, thank you. That when certainly the 5-year corporate plan and the annual plan was set, depending on the stage at which those various catalyst projects and initiatives were at. In the case of a number of them, they are at a particular stage where any budget that would be required has not yet been identified, as the strategy, for example, was under development. And until we had an endorsed strategy of council that'll be brought to this council for consideration, we don't yet then know what costs will be associated with the particular initiatives that would come in that strategy. So a budget bid, for example, would follow once we have a clear and endorsed strategy position. So the libraries strategy would be perhaps a good example of that, where we have the Ipswich Library strategy there in that same theme. That will come forward to council in the early part of 2022, early in 2022 for your endorsement, and after that time we will be then putting a budget bid together to probably commence in the coming financial year. So you might say, well, why is it in the annual plan? It's in the annual plan because we needed to do that work. So we're using internal resources to prepare the strategy, and then we seek a budget to implement.
Okay. CEO, there's only one traffic light, which is a great result, and thank you for the openness and honesty here, and that is on finalise the business case for the delivery of the iVolve project to implement a technology solution for council. Are you able to speak to what plans you have in place to address that?
certainly, and I did make a point and a note in the significant matters section of the CEO organisational performance report on that very important project. And the next quarterly report on iVolve will come forward to the Governance and Transparency Committee in December. But in short, we had initially planned to have commenced stage 3 of the iVolve project by now. We were intending to take an approach to engage an external and independent business partner after going through robust procurement processes and giving the matter careful consideration. We reviewed that decision, thinking and concluding that it wasn't the best value for money decision for council to proceed with an external business partner for stage 3. Instead, we have chosen to progress an alternative approach to stage 3, which is to source and engage our own program director, still through an organisation, as noted in the CEO organisational performance report, AVEC, that organisation is. However, this program director will be supported by staff that will be contracted or employed directly by council, thus giving us greater control and also better transfer of knowledge into ensuing stages of the project by taking that approach. So we have lost time as a result of this, hence why the traffic light is as it is. However, we will work as hard as we can to make up that time, but without compromising quality or taking any unnecessary or inappropriate risks in delivering such an important project for this council. As you know, its aims are very important to our ongoing business.
Thank you, CEO. Any other questions or discussions? No? I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Item 15.3. May I ask the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please? This report's on the monthly financial performance report for October 2021. I'll just say it again for the live stream.
Sorry, yes. Jeff Keats, Chief Financial Officer. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors.
Good morning. Is there anything in this report in particular you'd like to highlight, of things that are going well, but also things that you'd like to highlight to us as a high risk?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. I guess as a general comment, we are performing reasonably well, continuing the same trend that we've seen over the last few months, where expenses are being controlled relatively in line with budget, and we are in front in areas of revenue. So certainly in terms of our operating position, which is a key measure of our operating surpluses, we're ahead of where we would otherwise be in our current budgeted position, so by about $2 million, again, primarily driven by some additional fees and charges and some additional operational grants in there. So that's positive in the fact that we are in front of where we are and still controlling costs. Costs are slightly over, but very, very small in terms of labour and materials and services, so nothing of significance there. And I would say that's a watching brief with the executive team and managers going forward from here versus anything of great concern at this point in time. You'll note in terms of the overall what we refer to as the net result, which brings in all the capital items, there we are behind there in relation to donated assets, but that's not something that council can control as such. That's when they're handed over from developers to us. So we are behind about $8 million in that space. That's not of concern to me as such. That's not something that controls us, but that just affects the overall result when you're looking at the full position. And I guess the only one, just again to continue note like we did last time, when you're looking at the materials and services, we have had those additional legal costs, and obviously as that continues forward in budget amendments, we'll work with council as discussed last time in relation to any impacts of that.
Okay. So there certainly is a budget impact when council make decisions on developments.
Yes.
Like Wanless, and they don't like the decision and taking us to court. It's using ratepayers' money to pay the legal fees.
Correct, yes, and you've seen the total costs on the 3 previous ones, in excess of $6.5 million for those 3. And yes, the timing of that next offence will probably spread over a couple of years, and that's something we're working with both the legal and planning team as to the likelihood and the estimated costs of that, and then bringing that forward to yourselves as part of the budget amendment discussions, so impacts this year, but also potentially future years it comes forward. Just also noting there the capital side of things, just for noting. The IED program is pretty well on budget, very, very small variances to that overall year to date, which is pleasing. The Nicholas Street precinct, as always referred to, we're a little bit behind on what was the forecast budget when we put it together in March, April in relation to some of the retail works. But again, as part of the budget amendment, we'll rephase that with you and reset that to say what that's likely to be delivered through the end of this financial year and then into the future years.
Thank you, Mr Keach. Are there any other questions of Mr Keach? No, thank you.
Thank you.
I move that the report on Council's financial performance for the period ending 31st of October 2021, submitted in accordance with Section 204 of the Local Government Regulations 2012, be considered and noted by Council. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Johning. Any discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We move on to item 15.4, which is the temporary local planning instrument 1 of 2022. May I ask for the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please?
Morning, Mayor and Councillors. Brett Davey, Manager City Design.
Thank you, Mr Davey. Often planning matters are shrouded in mystery and as a dark art sometimes. Would you mind explaining what a TLPI is, a bit of the history and what we're proposing to do?
Yes, of course. So in the planning world, there are a number of instruments that are used to regulate activity in the landscape, and usually that's legislation and then a planning scheme. Planning schemes take a while to put together, as we've experienced with our current scheme, and they do take a little while to amend. So in the case of the Queensland legislation, there is an ability to implement a temporary instrument, which is an emergency instrument, to address some particular emergent issues that may be occurring, and they can be addressed in a faster way than would happen in a conventional planning scheme amendment. So a scheme amendment might take 12 months to do. So in 2018, once the scale and impact and severity of the waste industry and other activities were really being felt, we implemented the first TLPI on the subject of waste, and that was obviously an emergent instrument at the time. The intent of that instrument was to put a holding pattern on certain things and control things in a different way until a new scheme could be prepared. And over time, we haven't achieved a final scheme for a variety of reasons. So we've kept continuity of a TLPI for that almost 4 years now since we started. And so the subject of this report is a TLPI to continue that coverage whilst we finish the new Ipswich planning scheme.
So in layman's terms, what is the impact of this TLPI in regards to landfill and waste materials and things like that?
Yes, in fact, it supplements the Ipswich planning scheme to further regulate particular waste industry activities, including the likes of composting, landfill, and some resource recovery activities.
And can the TLPI stop incinerations or waste energy?
In terms of, there's probably 2 parts of that question. So the first is stopping. Local government planning instruments can't prohibit uses. They can provide a framework to indicate a preference on uses and a certain process, but they can't prohibit. The current TLPI doesn't address the issue of waste to energy. And what that means is it relies upon the planning scheme proper to do that. I've had a look at that issue. The planning scheme proper essentially requires the highest test that exists in our current planning scheme for a waste to energy facility or something similar.
Yeah, just a technical sort of thing here. In the report, in our papers, page 164. It's got duration of TLPI in accordance with section of the Planning Act. The effective date is the 28th of January 2022. In the recommendation itself, it talks about an early effective date of 28th of January 2022 or earlier. What's the reason for the addition of that word early effective date?
We're just anticipating how we go about implementing the TLPI at the end. So at this point in time, presuming there is an affirmative resolution today, we'll go through a process with the Queensland Government and the Deputy Premier, Planning Minister will need to sign off the TLPI, and then it'll come back to us for sign-off.
Okay.
So if we proceed to a council meeting in January, it's likely that the TLPI will have to take effect before the council meeting in January. So we're just kind of future-proofing for January just in case.
I understand that, but in the recommendation, which is different from what's in the body of the report,
Yep.
what's the value of the word early effective date or of the 28th of January or earlier? It seems like a tautology.
In a way it is. We've used some of the language out of the legislation so that we don't trip ourselves over with the state government and compliance with the Act.
Yeah, I don't understand what the word early is adding to the recommendation. I'd be more comfortable if it read with an effective date of the 28th of January 2022 or earlier. That would achieve the same thing, wouldn't it?
Yep. Yes, that
it's
would
just
achieve
that
the
it's
same thing.
inconsistent with the wording in the report.
Yep, I think we added in early effective date to the recommendation at a later point in drafting the report because that's a language that's used in the legislation. So we could actually remove or earlier from the end of that recommendation and still deal with both issues effectively.
Or take out the word early effective. But I don't know what early means if we're nominating the effective date and then adding the words or earlier.
If I can provide an example,
Yeah.
if we had all of the authorisations in place to bring into effect the TLPI at a meeting today, the early effective date would mean that it took effect formally yesterday, for example.
Yeah, I understand that, but isn't that covered by the last two words or earlier?
Yes,
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
just that we've got early and we've got or earlier. I don't think we need both.
Yeah, on your point of tautology, the early effective is the language that's out of the Act. So practically speaking, either way, the resolution can work if it proceeds along those lines, but I agree we can work on simplifying that if that
I'm easy.
satisfies
It
yourself.
just reads oddly compared with the report. Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
yep, I accept that.
Any other questions, Mr Davey? No, thank you very much, Mr Davey.
Thank you.
I haven't moved anything yet, Councillor Tully. Did you wish to remove one of the words early or earlier?
Oh, no, not
Before
really. It's just a bit odd, but I'm happy to accept this tautology on this rare occasion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tully. So the recommendation that Council make the temporary local planning instrument number 1 of 2022 Resource Recovery and Waste Activity Regulation in accordance with the Planning Act and the Minister's Guidelines and Rules with an early effective date of the 28th of January 2022 or earlier. Do I have a seconder for that? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fechner. Any discussion? My apologies. What? So I've just had the Secretariat point out that the attachment was updated yesterday and sent out on LG Hub. Can I just clarify that that's, I've got the copy here, but is everyone aware of that? I know an email went out. Yep, okay. Thank you very much, Vicky. Any other discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 15.5, which is the Sub-Regional Alliance, Waste Alliance, with the MRF, a Material Recycling Fund Facility Budget Allocation. May I ask the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please?
morning, Mayor and Councillors. David McAllister, Resource Recovery Manager. Excuse me, sorry. Start again. Let's try again.
Thank you, Mr McAllister. We're getting Ipswich used to the word FOGO. Tell us in layman's terms what a MRF is, a material recycling facility.
Exactly that. A materials recovery facility is the technical term. Sorry to correct you, Mayor.
Please do.
There's a facility that deals with the commingled recycling that comes from yellow top bins primarily. Your cardboard, your plastics, your metals, and in essence it is a sorting facility that breaks it apart into the various streams and sends it off for secondary processing, removes the waste stream and sends the other products to recovery.
Right. And where are the closest MRFs to us at the moment? Where are we sending ours?
Realistically, the only single opportunity for a MRF that deals with the product from Ipswich is Gibson Island in Brisbane. It belongs to Visy, and our product goes there along with the local region primarily.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to highlight to us? I know you've written a report, but in particular from a risk perspective, it looks like this is a motion just as a placeholder.
Yes, so in essence, this is a placeholder related to budget provision for the sub-regional work that is ongoing. We have a meeting tomorrow to progress the actual resolution towards the sub-regional activity. In essence, this is a placeholder setting up for budget provision for that, should we go ahead. And the meeting tomorrow will highlight, from the business case point of view, the options and the risks and the benefits that are very likely to come from that process. And at this point in time, this is a budget allocation, in essence, based on worst case scenario with zero grant funding and land application in this.
Okay.
So realistically, we are hoping to receive some grant funding, and there is potential for significant land costs to not be applicable in this project. So as I said, this is in essence worst case at this point in time, and we will know much more in the early new year.
So the sub-regional alliance with obviously Redlands Council and Logan, have we heard anything more from that's the state and the federal government grant, the Recycling Modernisation Fund? Have we heard how our
Unfortunately,
applications
I
are
heard yesterday that they had a very large amount of applications through the funding process, and they're now talking about March to give us under the Queensland Recycling Fund, and of course City Deals is still progressing through its process as well. So both have potential application of quite significant money towards this project. A large point of building a MRF is the capital investment to build the facility in the first place, and the more we can be funded for that, the more operational benefit long term at a unit rate that we'll receive.
And they'll lower the cost for the ratepayers.
Lower the cost quite significantly for the ratepayers per tonne that gets processed.
Thank you, Mr McAllister. Does anyone have any other questions? Yes, Councillor Fechner.
We might need to go into closed session to discuss the nature of the question, because I refer specifically to the worst case budget allocation, and I just wanted to float that with both yourself and the CFO and talk about the cash flow implications between now and the next 12 months. So yeah, I guess...
That is the confidential background paper.
Correct,
So
yeah.
you're moving that we go into closed session to discuss something of confidential nature.
Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Johnick. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We are now into closed session. Let me know, Harris. Thank you very much. We're now back out of open session. It's 11:34. We've had a discussion on this matter. We're into confidential matters. Are there any other questions of the council officer on this matter? No, thank you, Mr McAllister. I'll move this recommendation that council commit to include its proportionate share of any sub-regional alliance material recovery facility project funding in current and future budgets, and that budget amendments be subject to council's future consideration and acceptance of the business case. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Any discussion? No. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. I'd like to move for an adjournment for 10 minutes to 11:45. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. All those in favour? Please, I'll look around the room and it's unanimous and carried. Thank you very much. See you back again at 11:45. Thank you very much. We've come back from our adjournment. It's 11:45. We're on now item 15.6, variation to waste transport service contract 16251. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think this is a report looking at the additional services for the consolidation and transport of curbside recycling content. Would anyone like to speak to the relevant council officer on this particular matter? No? I'll move recommendations A through to C together. Do I have a seconder for that? Second. Thank you, Councillor Fichtner. I'll open it for any discussion. There being no discussion, I put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Move on to item 15.7, which is procurement, preferred supplier arrangements, 17209, provision of resource recovery and disposal of non-putrescible waste. May I speak to the relevant council officer? I'm going to ask questions about what happens if they do take putrescible waste there. So I'm not sure who's the best person is.
David McAllister, Resource Recovery Manager.
Thank you, Mr McAllister. I note that this is for the resource recovery and disposal of non-putrescible waste. Mm-hmm. If any of these suppliers do put putrescible waste in there, mm-hmm. What happens?
Two of the preferred suppliers, so to go back a step if I could, Mayor, this is a panel arrangement we're proposing to put together. So we have a range of suppliers because there's a range of products under this, everything from timber to the material that's in the pit at the transfer stations. The two primary suppliers of this service are proposed to be Tea Tree Landfill and Swanbank Landfill. So ultimately they are both licensed facilities to take putrescible waste, and they do not separate that product in terms of where it's disposed. So there's no legal risk from my point of view of the product being mixed, and in fact we're currently disposing of the non-putrescible waste under our putrescible contract since Cleanaway ceased operating.
Okay. So who monitors how that is being disposed? Is that us or is it the state?
We dictate where our products go to.
Yep.
The non-putrescible waste is primarily everything that comes out of the transfer stations. So there's generally no food waste in that material because that's collected through the garbage trucks and that goes direct to the putrescible contracts. Okay. So we will dictate waste out of the pit to either go to Swanbank Tea Tree or timber to go to a processing facility and so forth. So we control where the product goes in essence.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions of Mr McAllister? No, thank you very much, Mr McAllister. I'll move items A through to D all together. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I'll open up for any discussion. No discussion. Then I move that we approve all four recommendations. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. For the Deputy Mayor. We'll now move on to 15.8, which is the procurement of tender 16829, the civil construction works for Rebecca Plains Road, stage 3. And there are three recommendations there. Would anyone like to ask the relevant council officer any questions on this? No? I move that recommendation A through to C be moved together. I'm just going to confer with the CEO one thing. Thank you. Sorry for that. I was just getting some advice on, obviously this is the outcome of a tender evaluation, and so it is confidential to, I guess, until it's awarded, until it's been determined today. So I move for A through to C, and I had a seconder from Councillor Johnny. Thank you. Any discussion on the matter? There was no, so I'll take the vote for A through to C. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I think it's unanimous and carried. And I think now that it's been carried, I can state the fact that that contract is going to a company called All Roads Proprietary Limited, and the approximate purchase price, as per the confidential documents that councils have seen, is just over $19.5 million ex-GST over a 2-year period. We move on to item 15.9, which is the reappointment of the Urban Utilities Board members. Would anyone like to ask the relevant council officer any questions on this matter? No? I move that we put recommendations A through to D together. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Going to discussion, just noting that obviously since our last time we discussed board members, every single piece of correspondence I've received has been forwarded automatically to all the councillors, so there's no information that I have that you don't have. And I know that there's been some documentation sent out to you over the last couple of months. Any discussion on recommendations A through to D? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Move on to item 15.10, which is the Queensland Audit Office Final Management Report 2020-2021. Would anyone like to speak to the relevant council officer on this? No, I'll move the recommendation that the 2020-2021 Final Management Report for Ipswich City Council, as detailed in Attachment 1, be received and contents noted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I guess the only discussion I have were deficiencies that are raised are actually being addressed in the next report in 15.11, so I'll leave it till then. I'll put any other discussion? I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Item 15.11 is a report on the Audit and Risk Management Committee 2021-05 of the 6th of October 2021. Would anyone like to speak to the relevant council officer on this? No, I then move that the report of the Audit and Risk Management Committee 2021-05 of the 6th of October 2021 be received and the contents noted and their recommendations contained therein be adopted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. In discussions, I guess my discussion will be a question to the CEO, noting the outstanding deficiencies. What is the organisation doing to address the deficiencies that have been highlighted in the report? Sorry?
I didn't quite catch your question.
Oh, sorry, it's a bit, the acoustics here aren't great. Just wondering what, there are some deficiencies that have been noted. I'm asking the CEO, what's the organisation doing to address those?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The previous item was the full report that was resolved. That was the final management report from the QAO, where the deficiencies and significant deficiencies that were both reviewed and considered by QAO during the past financial year were noted, and the council management response was contained in that report. As the council would note in the minutes of the Audit and Risk Management Committee that are attached to this report, the external members, or several of the external members, noted the verbal update and tabled report that was provided by QAO. So I would draw to attention the comments that are noted there from Enquire as one of the external members, noting that it was the committee's view that there has been substantial improvement in the reported deficiencies and the actions taken to clear them, leading to the committee's view that controls and processes for financial information and reporting is trending in the right direction. So I guess I'd also add, in short, that all of the significant deficiencies that had been raised either last financial year or previously have been addressed and were noted as resolved pending final audit verification, which is when QAO comes back and just makes sure, doubly sure, as they like to be, as they should be, that everything has been addressed. And the only additional deficiency that was raised during the course of last financial year was also resolved before the audit was completed. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. CEO. Any discussion or debate? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We've already dealt with 15.12, the late report. So we move on to item 16.1, which is a no-sir motion from Councillor Tully. Would you like to...
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Just before I
move
that motion, can I just clarify that the wording in the agenda for today says that I gave notice of motion at the council meeting, at the previous council meeting, which wasn't correct. It was subsequent to the meeting. I'm not sure if that's been corrected. I sent an email to the organisation yesterday.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll formally move that the Chief Executive Officer write to the Minister for the Environment and the Great Barrier Reef and Minister for Science and Youth Affairs, Megan Scanlon, MP, seeking the dedication of the White Rock Spring Mountain Conservation Estate as a national park in accordance with Section 29 of the Nature Conservation Act 1992, and B, that a copy of the letter be forwarded to the Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, MP, and to each of the 5 state members representing the Ipswich region.
Thank you. Do we
And
have
I'll
a seconder for that?
one. Thank you.
Yep. You're seconding?
Yes,
Deputy Mayor?
thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up for discussion. Did you wish to go into any explanation, Councillor Tully?
Thank you, Mayor. On the state government website, it gives an illustrative examples of the provisions of the Nature Conservation Act, which provides the legislative basis for the conservation of nature through the dedication, declaration and management of protected areas and the protection of native wildlife and its habitat. And according to the state website, that as at the 30th of June 2020, there were 9,791,208 hectares of state land and Aboriginal freehold land included in 9 national parks scientific, 275 national parks, 28 national parks of Cape York Peninsula Aboriginal land, 234 conservation parks and 47 resources reserves in Queensland. Goes on to say that the Act provides the legislative framework to manage these areas so that their natural and cultural values are protected and conserved while recognising other compatible uses. Now, the proposal is that we formally approach according to the motion, the relevant minister for the dedication of the White Rock Spring Mountain Conservation Estate in accordance with the provisions of the Act. That estate was originally part of the Moreton Shire until its amalgamation with Ipswich in March 1995. Comprises some 2,500 hectares of land, 600 plant species have been identified within that area, and 150 fauna species have also been identified. It ranges in the west from White Rock on the edge of the Ripley Valley to Spring Mountain in the east, bordering the Springfield development. It has some of the richest and most diverse conservation land in Queensland. And I recall some years ago, so some of the parts of that estate are absolutely magnificent. I had the opportunity of going up onto Spring Mountain itself, which overlooks the city of Brisbane, standing at 355 metres above sea level, right out to Moreton Bay. So we're talking about a magnificent sector of our city. There are 12 councils in southeast Queensland. The following have national parks: Brisbane, Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast, Noosa, Somerset, Lockyer Valley, Toowoomba, Scenic Rim, Logan, Redland, Gold Coast. That's 11. There's one that doesn't have any national parks in our city, and that's Ipswich. It's a regionally significant area of land and completely appropriate for the state government to designate this as the first national park in Ipswich. It's a golden opportunity not to be missed. It would boost tourism in our city, and it would provide further protection for our city's environment. And I certainly, in relation to this matter, it's time that it happened, and I'd urge councillors to support this initiative.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. The seconder, would you like to speak to it?
And to speak to that as well, I do recall from our previous CEO, David Farmer, actually making us aware that we did not have a national park within our LGA, and that was quite surprising given the amount of land that we hold. National parks are our most effective tool for protecting and managing wildlife habitat because they are the only land use dedicated to conservation and addressing threats in perpetuity backed up by the authorities of the state. And recent bushfires have burnt hundreds of thousands of hectares of wildlife habitat, including rainforests that never burnt before, across many national parks in Queensland. The bushfire risk is increasing and wildlife need more habitat protected to be able to survive in a hotter future. Wildlife need more national parks, not less.
Thank you for that. In speaking to this, obviously, I'm always, when it's a new matter, to look at what are the pros and cons. So do we mind outlining, because we have had many discussions, I think, in council about parks, and I think it's been well known we don't have any national parks in Ipswich whatsoever. And I think there's always been that discussion that it would be good from a financial perspective for there to be a national park. But I guess with it being our own conservation area, that means we're actually in control of it and not the state. So I'm very interested to know what the pros and cons are and what the cost opportunities are, but also what the other tourism, other opportunities are. Yes, Councillor Milligan.
Mayor, are we able to ask some background questions of an appropriate council officer with regards to...
Yep, absolutely. Would you like to speak to the relevant council officer?
I'd like to call forward the appropriate officer to detail that.
Kate Kavanagh, Manager, Environment Sustainability.
Councillor
Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms Kavanagh. Could you give just a brief account on the history with regards to Ipswich City Council about that conservation estate?
Yeah, White Rock Springmount Conservation Estate is one of our second biggest conservation estates within the city and has been purchased wholly through the EnviroPlan levy since its inception in 95, 96 or 96, 97. The estate currently is managed under the EnviroPlan levy and is one of our number one estates for visitation in the city.
And with consideration to the recommendation, would you be able to just detail implications following on if from that suggestion of the recommendation?
The recommendation, well, not my recommendation, I guess. A suggestion would be that we would do the analysis of pros and cons and potentially have conversations with the state department relevant for this and just understand their positioning around national parks and declaration as well, and potentially present that back to council for consideration.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
I apologise for using the word recommendation because it's a motion by the councillor.
Yeah.
Beg my pardon.
Thank you. I think Councillor Fechner.
Just a question, and Councillor Tully might be able to shed some light on this as well. Has council ever written to the state to ask such a question?
No, not that I'm aware of. The acquisition has just been said through the Enviro levy as it was seen as the primary motivator for it. Can I just say the issues that Councillor Jonik mentioned in relation to bushfires, in particular that recent fire in the Burleigh Heads National Park, where that did have a state responsibility because that is a national park there in the Gold Coast Council area. So, sure, there's always pros and cons, but I think the pros in this case are so overwhelming that it's fairly clear.
Are there any other questions of Ms Kavanagh?
I was asking them both.
Yes, that's what I was saying. Yes.
I'd have to go back and have a look at records. There was discussion many years ago in regards to the Flinders-Gulman Conservation Estate and whether that might be considered as a potential candidate as a national park. But whether we formally wrote, I'd have to actually go back and have a look, yeah.
Councillor Milligan, do you have another question?
Yes, just one final one there. So if it was requested for a report to be brought forward from the branch, that would detail also there would be contact made with the appropriate state department.
Is this a question for Ms Kavanagh?
Yes, that's what I'm asking, yes.
And so the question would be, sorry?
So if a report was requested with regards to this motion, would part of that report consist of details of contact with the State Department?
Yeah, we could do that if that was part of the report requirements, yeah. No. Yep.
Thank you, Ms Kavanagh.
Yep.
Thank you. Based on some of to follow good governance, and I think also based on some of the discussion here, I think there's a bit of interest here. I propose an amendment, and that amendment would be the fact that this matter is referred to the Environment Sustainability Committee for consideration. Before we write a letter off, I think it'd be good for us to understand the pros and cons, also see some public perception as well. I move that. I'll wait till Vicky got that. Yes.
Are you referring the two items to the Environment and Sustainability Committee? Or are you calling for a report to be referred to the Environment and Sustainability Committee addressing what has been proposed by Councillor Tully this morning?
Well, I'm proposing that the matter goes to the Environment Sustainability Committee for consideration. Yeah. Well, we need to get what the council's views are, and I think until we know all the pros and cons and also the fact that it is a pretty big decision whether we public perception and views from the public as well.
Just through you, Chair, noting that this is Councillor Tully's motion and he's not a member of that committee.
We could have...
I'm
just very hesitant to say yes when we haven't
It's
looked at all
just
the
a
pros and
proposal at
cons.
the
That's
moment.
all.
The amendment might not even be carried.
Yeah, if there is a seconder, I won't be supporting that amendment or variation.
Yeah. So this may be referred to the Environment Sustainability Committee for further consideration. Do I have a seconder for that? There being none, the amendment doesn't go forward.
Point of order. Are you foreshadowing now because the mover rejected your
My
amendment?
apologies. It's a foreshadowed. My apologies. Okay, thank you. So we go back to the original motion. Is there any other discussion on that, on A and B? Yes, Councillor William?
I'd just like to express that before sending off a letter to a minister, I would prefer to have some more background information with respect to the content. If the minister hypothetically did immediately say, yeah, good, tick, go, then I would feel that I haven't made a decision in the best interest of the local government.
Thank you, Councillor. I guess to me, I don't know the pros and cons of everything, so I'm just after some further information. Any other discussion? Yes, Councillor Madsen?
It's at this point where the procedure's getting a bit unclear. Reading the room, I think there's a balance of people here that would prefer for a report to be raised for the Environment and Sustainability Committee that actually addresses some of those questions. Because if the matter's referred, it would just be item A and B in their present form. No further collateral would be arranged for that. No timeline for it arriving at the committee has been raised. So if I could get some clarification as to whether I need to move an amendment or a secondary foreshadowed motion,
Yes.
I would be keen to get some consensus in the room.
I'm open to amending the foreshadowed motion, Councillor Madsen, if you're saying that
Can I just add that when the motion formed part of my pre-reading pack, I did my own research on what that recommendation would entail if I should support it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So
Mayor,
just
if I may.
if I go back to so Councillor Madsen and I were discussing about the foreshadowed motion. Are you suggesting an amendment to the foreshadowed motion that rather than be referred, that a report be provided to the Environment Sustainability Committee?
If I were to propose a foreshadowed motion in my own words, it would be that that a report be prepared for the Environment and Sustainability Committee no later than February 2022, and then it would be addressing a number of points that people have raised today. Now, that being said, any process of writing to the relevant minister and members of Parliament, I'm more than confident that correspondence would come back and forth. These sorts of decisions, this wouldn't be the last time that we discuss the matter. It's requesting them. So I also think that a report could very well come back once we receive return correspondence from the minister, should Councillor Tully's motion proceed.
Yeah.
So I think in a very swings and roundabouts way, we've danced around it without really having to think about what would fall into line if A and B today are adopted. I mean, that's what has to be clear to us. If we write to the minister, that department will have a look at it, they will write to us back, and there will be decisions that have to be made, there will have to be negotiations that are undertaken before any final transfer of an asset like this would occur. So
Yep. Thank you. So based on your foreshadowed motion, Councillor Madsen, I'll withdraw my foreshadowed motion. And I take into consideration, thank you.
Well, you don't have to withdraw it, it was defeated, you didn't get a second.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I think I did it out of turn. I think that's what happened, I did it out of turn.
And, you know, I apologise for adding to the clutter on this matter. I'm not even seeking to propose a foreshadowed motion. I'm just saying that if somebody wanted one, that's what it would need to ask. If you listen to the room and what people are saying, as if they need a report before they make a decision, even though I've already argued as to why that may not necessarily be the case.
Thank you. Thank you. And I guess from my perspective as well, you know, we've just voted today for community panels. You know, we've been contacted by, I certainly have been contacted by a number of people from the Environment Community Reference Group who have said that we passed 2 environmental policies this year without consulting them. So I'm just very cognizant of making sure that we do truly consult with our community as well. And I think doing a report in the foreshadowed motion would also assist with that as well. If I can just check with process, our next thing is to look at whether we're going to vote for the notice of motion from Councillor Tully, and I should give Councillor Tully the right of reply.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor. We are elected to make decisions, and this is a fairly simple decision to seek that declaration through the state government. The process, as Councillor Madsen has indicated, I expect would take some time, between 6 and maybe 12 months, but without delaying it, without holding on to it, as Councillor Jonik said, she had looked at the background. I think if there were any negatives to this, it would be very clear or within people's minds if there were any substantive downsides. I think to send a message to the community that we don't have a national park in this city, that we should have a national park in the city. This is the primary area which will ensure that we're part of a network in South East Queensland, that we're not currently there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tully. On that, I'll put the matter to the vote. So the notice of motion of A and B to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And look around the table. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's carried. So Councillor Madsen, Ireland, Councillor Jonik, Councillor Tully, Councillor Doyle and Councillor Fechner. Those against, myself, Councillor Cosman and Councillor Milligan. So the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Now, there are no questions on notice, so I'll close the meeting at 12:15. Thank you very much.